My name is Ron Barron, and this is a bloominBoomer.com podcast series entitled, There Are No Ordinary People. Thank you for joining us. There are no ordinary people is a quote from British author and philosopher C.S.Lewis. Indeed, we are all unique, and when you get to the age of being a boomer, that's anyone born between 1946 and 1964 or thereabouts, well, your life's experiences have begun to add up. Each podcast in this series will feature a fellow boomer who will offer us a bit about themselves and perhaps some encouraging words of advice for younger generations. Today, I'm delighted that Ray Carnevali agreed to pass on a bit of himself in this issue of There Are No Ordinary People.
Well, okay, I grew up in Titan on an apple farm, and parents sent me to a parochial school, which I'm not sure what precipitated that, but I was at Highland High School when all of a sudden, I think I invited someone out to a dance. My mother said, "That's it, you're going to the Catholic school in town." So the next year I was there, and after graduating from school, the priest told me he thought I had a vocation to be a priest. So I spent a year at St. Edward's Seminary in Kenmore. And one of the priests there said, "You may be more materialistic than we'd like as our priest." So they got me enrolled in CLU. And this was in the Vietnam War beginning. That summer, I got a draft number, and it was a pretty low number, so I enlisted in the Air Force without telling my parents. And that was met with some resistance. But anyway, I went off to Texas for testing to find out. I think this is one of those things where the Air Force had it right. 2 days worth of testing, thousands of questions put through a IBM card, first computers there in the 60s, to decide yes or no, this or that questions on what your personality aptitude is for a job. And based on your SAT scores, it put you in something you could be useful with. So it turns out I got to go cryptography, which was very interesting since there weren't that many in the U.S., but it was a full, almost a year and a half school in Texas. And so I ended up going to England to an underground site where we, in the 60s, were intercepting Russian communications. Can you believe it? It was a 40-acre antenna site under a sheep pasture. That's where I worked. And in the evenings, all the friends went to a local pub and learned British beer and darts, steel-tip darts. And so, of course, there were places to go and things to do where I met a young lady in the local village. And her dad, turns out, invited me to his pub, his local. And he asked me to be his partner in darts. And little did I know at that time that he was the city champ. So in that kind of games, you play 501 and come back to zero. And you have to start with a double, that's the outer ring, and end with a double, the outer ring. And he didn't ask me any questions whether I knew how to throw or not, but to qualify for the next game, you had to chalk. That means you stand at a chalkboard and keep score for the people in front of you. Well, these guys would bam, 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 throw 3 darts and say 75 or 80 or 100, whatever it was. And then I had to immediately subtract it from the existing score and post it there in chalkboard. And the other guy would get up and throw, well, they'd go so fast that I'd still be saying, let's see, minus 10. Here come a second score for me to subtract. Well, This was the test. And I didn't know about that they put Americans through because non-Americans could do subtraction on the fly. And so that was the test of fire. So I finally was able to subtract numbers reasonably well, but the lesson learned there, life lesson, he got to 157, I think. And he said, right, boy. He always called me boy. He was, by the way, Battle of, was it the Bulge, where he had to get out in the water and catch a boat ride back to England. He was a soldier in that. But anyway, and he got to 157 and he said, boy, he said, triple 20, triple 19, double top. Think it and do it. And I said, what the hell? So bam, 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 3 darts. He throws, and the little wedge in the middle of a number is a triple. So he throws a triple 20 worth 60, throws a triple 19 worth 57, which leaves the score at 40. And the third dart, without hesitation, boom, into the top double ring to win the game. Well, you just don't go out from 157. I mean, that's, to me, I mean, that was like a miracle. Well, the other mates in the pub says, oh, really, not again, so they have to buy us a pint. And so that's the way I learned darts from my father-in-law. Turns out that you have to think it, see it in your mind, and then do it without any hesitation. In other words, believe, have the faith, and your subconscious will perform without you consciously interfering. I think it's what I learned from that. And I think it's held me in good stead in darts. I used to belong to a dart league over here, and I've had a few people call me names when I do one of those things. You know, it's always nice when you can call it and do it. In any event, so that was England and the dart lesson.
Now you've taken that life lesson and applied it to golf, I think, haven't you?
You know, golf has been a never-ending lesson on the takeaway from golf is accept your limitations. And every time I score poorly at golf is when I try to do more. When I try to swing harder to get a lousy 2 yards, I end up ruining the whole shot. Just accept what I had, and I would have been so much better off. And so I try to take that one at golf, but I do try to see the shot in my mind and let my subconscious perform it, because I've done it thousands of times, and not get consciously involved trying to swing hard.
Back to you being a cryptologist.
Oh.
And going and doing your schooling in England, and of course England was the epicenter of breaking, I believe, the Enigma machine during World War II.
Exactly.
Did you ever meet Dr. Curing at all in your trips there?
No, I worked in 3 years. I worked in the underground site, and our machines were one step up from the Enigma. These machines were suitcase sized, and you could encrypt. You had to have one at each end, and they had to be, as they call, in step. In other words, if those two weren't in step, then that's what I did. My job was to keep the equipment in the UK in step with the transmitting equipment in the US. So, and then in Britain, we would then transmit. We were called a relay site. So all communications from the United States came through this site, and then was transmitted to all the US bases in Turkey, Germany, and so on. And yeah, it's very close to the Enigma, and it was interesting. We used that as an example.
Yeah. Now, when they said, Ray, we think you'd make a good cryptologist, what about you did you think that they saw?
Oh, good question. This was originally, Kennedy had just been shot when I was in school in Texas. and they had a flying command post started. And from my test, the one thing I loved to do was fix things. I'd rather turn a screwdriver than push a button. I'd rather turn a knob than these other types of jobs. So, which meant that the flying command post and the cryptologist had to be able to fix and maintain the equipment, electromechanical. And so since I had the aptitude for both and it was in my personality profile, I was set, and my training then became for the flying command post. We would have a B-52 in the air at all times after that business with Khrushchev and the shoe, and remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, but before I got deployed on that plane, I had to do super top secret. I mean, I've already got a top secret, but to get on that plane, I could not have any relatives in another country outside the U.S. And they turned up my grandmother's sister was still alive in Italy. And since I had a living relative in a foreign country, I was denied. And with that, they gave you my choice of service locations. And my choice, I had Bermuda, Misawa, Japan, Baden-Baden, Germany, Goose Bay, and RAF Upper Hayford in England. I said, well, hell, I always wanted to see England. And so that's where I ended up, as fate would have it.
And that's where you found your wife.
My true love, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was invited to a birthday party from a local girl. The village there was maybe 2,000 people, maybe 1,500, very small local village. And everybody knows everybody. And the local sweet shop owner, her name was Mrs. Egan. Well, her daughter and my roommate were friends, and he was invited to her birthday party. And so I went because I had to drive him. And I'm sitting out in there, what they call a foyer, where is a few chairs and books. And then it goes into the main room of the house. I didn't feel comfortable there, so I sat out there. Well, here comes this girl that looked exactly like Sophia Loren. I mean, just a knockoff. And she walks in and she looked grumpy. Well, and her eyes, we met our eyes, and that was that. And well, as time went on, she sat down there too. Turns out she didn't know the girl all that well, but her only night out, Friday nights, one night a week, her mother made her go to this because it was her friend's daughter, her mother's. So her mother was friends with the young girls. Anyway, so she sat there, arms crossed, kind of. So I thought, wow, I got to think of a icebreaker. So as luck would have it, I thought the only thing I know a lot about from a Judeo-Christian background at Seattle U and the seminary and the Catholic high school, I thought, well, I'll ask her. I said, so what religion are you? Oh my gosh, I got the look from hell. Honestly, I could have been burned to a crisp from that look. Nothing but a cinder there. Well, she says, why do you want to know? And her most posh British accent. And I thought, whoa, and I was stunned. I thought I could talk about anything religious, but I didn't know what to say to that. So I was stuttered around, and it didn't end well, so we didn't speak anymore. Turns out I asked the only Irish girl in town who's Catholic and is very defensive, right? Turns out the British aren't that enthused about Catholics in a small town. So anyway, I didn't know that. So her mother had been holding whist drives in town for years to build a Catholic church. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in England. I'd been to a lot of the pubs, but I never met really, anyone quite like that. But so we really didn't speak. And the mother of the young lady of the house said, would you come back and join us for tea tomorrow? I said, sure, what the heck. I hadn't been to tea before, so I come back to tea, and who should be there but this girl, Christine. And I thought, oh, there's going to be trouble now. So there's just the two of us. Now I'm there with the mother and father, of this young girl in their house, in their kitchen, and we're having tea, and this woman says, why don't you and Christine, why don't you children go to the pictures, which is the movies in town? I said, oh, I'm in. And so there was a negotiation, and she decided to go to the pictures with me this Saturday afternoon. And since she got a day out because it was an invite for tea, you see. In any event, the only picture in town is none other than Tom Jones. So I've got to sit through Tom Jones with this gal, and I'm trying to make small talk, and I don't know what to do. But in the end, I find out, I blurt out that I'm Catholic, and my background, and that all my empathy and sincere hope is with the Irish, that they can overcome and survive in that town and get their church built. And so we became friends, and but she wouldn't let me come to her house. I had to drop her off 2 blocks away. And so that began our little get together. But that's how, on the shakedown, probably a few months later, her dad invited me to the pub to decide whether or not I was a keeper or not.
If you were a dart player or not.
Well, if I could play darts and count backwards and handle my beer, because he had an ulcer and couldn't drink his beer. So whenever he'd get halfway through his pint, which was an insult if he didn't finish a pint before the end of the game, he says, here, boy, finish this for me. So I would drink my pint and his pint. Well, hell, you can't go all night like that, not with British pints. Oh, I had another story. Reminds me of a Yank, if I may.
Sure.
One of my travels, I traveled down the Thames to Oxford. I always wanted to see Oxford. I'm traveling around Oxford, and I go south of Oxford to a village, and I'm trying to get to these single track roads to villages that are not tourist traps. So I go into a pub, what I think is a really authentic, totally British pub, and I order what I think is a proper pint of ale, and there's 20 guys in uniform in a corner, and there's a shout come out, he's a Yank. And I thought, oh boy, trouble. I said, well, I'm not sure how I'm going to handle this. And so the next thing comes out, buy him a pint. And so come on and join us. So they buy me the pint of beer. I go join them. Turns out, during the war, these guys are all 10 years older than I am, and all were children in that Abingdon town when the Americans were mobilizing for D-Day. And all of the Americans would travel through the roads, throwing things out to the children, which were these guys. And so Americans were saints, and they just loved them. And by extension, I got to be a hero. Come on, boy. Come on, mate. I was a mate now, and not, I was a Yank and a mate, and I got to go to their parties and pubs for the next, and that's where I took Christine. And the military service was the best absolute experience of my life. And in the meantime, I'm courting young Christine. And
Sophia Loren.
Oh, I'll show you a picture after we're done.
Excellent.
I've got one in the card.
Yeah. So you've been married to Christine for how many years?
57.
57. You had 2 children.
Yes, boy and a girl.
And they have given you 3 grandchildren.
Yes.
Yeah. You told me earlier before we started recording, some of your child rearing techniques, which were really quite fascinating. Maybe you could share some of those ideas with us.
When I got home from the service, I joined Pacific Northwest Bell, and I found out after only 5 or 6 years of climbing poles that it just wasn't for me. I thought, how do I do this when I'm 60? So I went to school at Central Washington State, one of the commuters, and business and accounting. And when I got out, they sent me to Seattle to work in an accounting job. My first job was accounting, and the job was accounts payable. 25 people from 19 to 63 years old. You wouldn't think that's a big deal today, but in that small group, we were the first group in the AT&T 23 Bell companies to mechanize accounts payable. We had a mini computer and keyboard and those old time monitors, you see them that look like a boat anchor. Well, anyway, and my boss said he came across a video from a guy, Dr. Morris Massey. The name of it was You Are What You Were When You Were Value Programmed. And it made so I booked a conference room and had all 25 in there, played the video, and we chatted about it. But the essence of the video and what this man said was, people are programmed with their life's values at an age when you're 13 to 14 years old. And what's going on in the world around you at that moment affects you for the rest of your life. But he was very persuasive in his video, and he showed, look, a person who is 60 today was a young child in the 30s during the Depression. And if you see them saving string and rubber bands today, there's a reason. And if they like overtime, that's the reason is they had to go without. Conversely, a child of the 60s and 70s pretty much had everything handed to them. And especially the 60s, because I was trouble with an 18-year-old and my crew who had gone through freedom of the 60s and no one telling her what to do. She wasn't going to be told to work overtime. And in any event, each generation who programmed values based on what was going on during their time. There was a time when there was a nuclear scare. People were afraid any moment we could have a nuclear bomb. And so those values were inculcated in those people at that time. So I'm thinking to myself, holy smokes, my daughter's 9. I need to get my values infused somehow. And so I did a lot of pheasant hunting and fishing, salmon fishing. And I found early on that taking them both at the same time just doesn't work. It was just a competition for attention. So taking them one at a time for a 3-hour trip to Othello from Woodinville, Washington, was perfect. Get to stay in a motel and have restaurants. But on the way and on the way back, I have a captive audience to download everything and anything that I find of value. But you can't just say to now, this is what, So you tell stories of how life proceeded, how life opened up, opportunities, things happened, and where you make decisions based on the choices available, and the outcomes that then you receive. So the children then were able to, I think, absorb my values at a critical time in their life between the ages of 10, 11, 12, 13, both of them. And that's probably my most proudest accomplishment. As I look at them now, they are solid citizens. My son's been married 20 years, I think, and they're both one job people. In other words, my daughter just got 30 years with her company, and my son was recruited by Chevron, and he's still with them after 20 years. So it's
so you would tell them parables as opposed to this is what
yes,
this is what you don't do.
Exactly. A parable might be I remember one that was most important to me, that my grandfather, I says, Kevin, my son, you remember, because of our last name back in the 50s, when I was in grade school, kids would pick on anybody who's different. Yeah, so what? He's hardly staying awake. I says, well, they made jokes, and they said Italian jokes, and they said rude things to me, which normally a person might fight about. And I went home and talked to my grandfather about it, and this would be one of the parables. This is the example of how I would speak to the children, by talking to them about my conversation with my grandfather about the abuse I was taking at school. Mm-hmm. And my grandfather says, it's not what people say, but why. So he went through a long discussion with me about why, analyze why people, look at them straight in the eye and try to think, why are they saying what they're saying to you? So I make sure both my children understood that point of it's not what, but why. And today I'm most proud because both of them use that when they're in a crowd. They're not, well, my daughter is very social and loud. When she goes into a room, she doesn't know a stranger. She'll go around the whole room and have them all laughing. But my son's very introspective, and he'll stand there and analyze most everybody in the room pretty much based on what they say and why he surmises they're saying it.
You grew up in a community of many ethnic groups and a melting pot, so to speak. But there weren't a lot of Italians, right? So what was your experience as a young Italian person growing up in a valley? In Tyotin, Washington, Tyotin, Cowiche, we were the only Italians in that grade school and high school. And as my parents met at what they used to have, a Italian picnic, and all of the Italians from the lower valley and Yakima would get together at Eschball Park. There would be Paganellis from the lower valley and Picottis and DCOs, and they'd all meet out there and bring a potluck and have a picnic, and that's where my dad met my mother. And I know in the parables with the children, one of the things was to be proud of our heritage. So I would go into what had happened throughout the history with Caesar and how the Romans had built such a great civilization, and then the issues that that caused their demise. And so I tried to impress on them to keep truthful to those principles that made a country great, and try to tell them about that country. But really, I'm trying to tell them, you see, without telling them. One of the truisms I found, by the way, that I'm trying to express now that I'm having difficulty is my son was just so serious about school, and my daughter was not. And so I knew that when he's studying in his room, he could hear. And so my wife and I would be at the kitchen table, and my daughter was all King Co in basketball, all King Co in, that's King County. She was in high school at Bothell in the baseball. She's a sophomore, and here she is the best at everything. And the newspaper articles were never ending. Well, it's tough when your older sister is getting all this press. So my son, and so I remember wife and I would sit there in the kitchen. I say, yeah, Lisa's article about Lisa in the paper today was nice, but Kevin's grades were the best. This, what he's doing in school, and so we go on and on about this. But what you know is happening is that he's listening in his room to what we're saying. It's just down the hall. He can hear every word.
And when you speak to a child directly, it's one thing. There's resistance, there's a shield. But when you speak and it comes in the side door, there's no resistance, there's no blockage, there's no filter. He takes it for what it's worth. And so what that did was convince him his talents might not be athletic because he's fighting with all these other boys who were good athletes, but he had the smarts to be the top in his class. Mm-hmm. And that's where he was working hard at. And sure enough, he graduated valedictorian, and it's interesting how that played out. Mm-hmm. But I always remember that truism of getting through to children through the side door where there's no resistance. And you can only do it if they're listening to a conversation that they think is not meant for them to hear. And so then that way I would praise the daughter or my son through the side door, and it seemed to work. And I would always praise what they're doing well. My grandparents, I would talk about our grandparents and what a struggle it was, and how my dad at sometimes would go climb trees to get birds' eggs. Think about that. I probably didn't happen all that often, but it would bring home those things that my parents had to do that the children today didn't even dream. They just go to the grocery store and grab a dozen eggs. And so I tried to bring a reality to their history, that the Italians that worked hard in the valley and succeeded had done so through hard work and perseverance, and that was the most valuable lesson to learn. So
imagine your three grandchildren, and I know one is already an accomplished doctor, but you have two younger grandchildren.
Yes.
I don't know if you'd like to give them or take an opportunity to give them some advice, and maybe every other grandchild that might watch this.
Yeah, they're just such special kids. Right now, I get to see them maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and they are so different. My the grandson is just a little live wire, but he's hooked like most children his age on video game. He walks around with this thing and it's going down tunnels, and I think it's called Minecraft or something like that. And she is just a sweetie. She is, she's going to be a ballet dancer, just artist ballet, so they couldn't be more different. But I remember saying to my son over and over, and if I would say something to them, it would be, it's the going and not the scoring. Or it's the anticipation of an event where you're going to go somewhere, do something, be somewhere. And because when you actually get there and you're involved in the moment, it goes by so fast, you don't get to enjoy it as much as you did the going. And so even if the outcome isn't what you anticipated, you appreciate the opportunity. And so that's what I try. I think I told that to my son, my grandson. He didn't like his golf. I mean, he's 9 years old, for crying out loud. He couldn't hit the ball the way his dad does. And so he was measuring against the wrong standard. And I told him, well, it'll come. Don't worry about it. You just have to accept what you have right now. And as you get older and you get better tuned in with your muscles, it'll all come together. So just have fun with the going right now. Come with us, have our snacks, enjoy the hamburger, and don't worry about the golf. So right now, that's kind of, I think, the other thing I told him, I remember, was practice what's important. And there's a lot of things to do in life, but there's some things you might find more important than others. Well, practice doing that. reading, or if math, doing math problems, set yourself up with some hand problems rather than using your computer. And he says, what? I says, yeah, try to do the multiplication tables. What are that? What are those? And that's the funniest answer when you get that from a child. We were just beat up on those when we were in grade school. And now these kids rather use their laptop or their calculator when he pulled out his phone. I says, come on, put that away. Let's do it manually. And he's looking at me like, he pulls back like, what are you, some kind of prehistoric? And so that was fun, to mess with the children today and act like a prehistoric creature. And they give you space until they find out you're messing with them. And that's what's fun, is the realization that Grandpa, G-Paw, they call me G-Paw, was messing with him.
So the idea that you still have the, let's say, the cognitive capacity to mess with them allows them to respect you just a bit.
That's good. I didn't realize they might think I'd be losing it a little bit, but that's true. They do appreciate humor, especially when I throw something at them and they have to think about it, and then they get it, and then they think, "Oh, you doing that again?" And they love it when finally the light comes on.
Sure. So Ray, what would be your advice to them in terms of finding a mate?
Oh,
your grandchildren.
It happens. All through high school, I had a true love. I thought this young girl was, we were going steady, but it was what you do in high school. But I think when you see the person the first time, I think there's a lot to be said about the love at first sight, or the spark that happens. Because I remember the first time I saw my wife to be, there was clearly something clicked there, and she tells me now that something did with her, but she didn't want to recognize it. She wasn't as obvious because she was more refined, but not quite the obtuse Yank, But I would tell them that meet as many, the more opportunities you have. I know I've told this to, who did I tell? Oh, my granddaughter. We had a little chat, and I said, Samantha, meet as many people, guys, as you possibly can. And that provides the insight for your decision making. You'll get to know all of the possibilities of what could be good and bad and desirable, and dimensions of your thought. The perspective. You need perspective, but if you only meet one person, it's a pretty small window. But if you meet 100 and get to know them reasonably well, gives you a great idea of what you might be happy with. On the other hand, in the meeting all those 100 people, bam, there's going to be one that might set the sparks.
Yeah. So you've seen a lot of changes in your life. Is there any change that stands out to you as being, one of the most remarkable things?
One of those where you have to see it and believe it is live it. I think there's a lesson to be heard to learn about living an experience, to appreciate. I used to say this a lot to the kids. You have to know worse to appreciate better. It's a short term, but it's very important. Know worse to appreciate better. Well, and I tell the kids I had malignant melanoma in my ear, just a tiny speck, but guys will be dead in a year if we don't fix it. So they whacked it off, and then No sooner got that taken care of, I said, well, you've got an irregular heartbeat, so it gave me a stent. Okay, I'm going fine. And then all of a sudden I find out I've got prostate cancer. And I had a great doctor who showed me pictures of my cells. He says, see, this is a regular cell, and this one is your cell. I said, God, it looks horrible. He says, yeah, it's wildly aggressive. You'll be dead in a year. It's all for goodness sakes. Because first he started out telling me about prostate cancer is watching weight. He says 99% of American men over 70 are watching weight. They end up dying with it, not from it. I said, but not you. So these are your choices. So he gave me 3 choices. I took what he called the A+, and that was 5 years ago. So every year you get your PSA, it's good, and you're living large, but you appreciate life so much better now than I did then. I took it totally for granted. Honestly, I took it for granted after my ear problem. I thought, well, that's a one-off, so what? I was a farmer, and I never took care of my skin with all the sunshine. And now, some of this stuff, I think, well, it could happen to anybody. And so it's been interesting appreciating life so much more. And now, after 2 years ago, my son had a heart attack. He's 50, crying out. Then what does he do? He's a character. Hey, it's my fault. I says, no. See, yep, you're the one with the DNA. So we called the doctor, the surgeon who did the open heart surgery on him. The doctor says, oh no, he says 80-20, 80% lifestyle, 20% DNA. Kevin, see? That we go golfing together and enjoy the time. I think there's more intrinsic value in the moment, enjoying the moment when you've had a time when you're on a table and you might not get another moment.
You've seen a lot of, a lot of cultural changes as well in your life, and we certainly are in the amidst a lot of cultural changes today, considering all the things that have gone on. If you were to give your grandchildren some advice as to how they might navigate all of these changes, what might that be?
I think I've come to the conclusion if I could somehow get them, if they were listening, if I could somehow get them to listen, I might tell them one of my secret little parables as we're driving along. Everybody on this earth has been together long enough so that there shouldn't be any differences. And the more we focus on differences, the less likely we're going to become one group, one America again. Like at one time, it seems like Americans were centered on being Americans and for the group, for the good of all. And all of a sudden, it seems that our focus has been on differences rather than what do we have that's in common. And so that's what I would say to them. Nobody cares today whether you're Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, or Mexican. We're all in it together, except all of the things that they can provide. Every group of people have special talents. Everybody has, I think there was a study years ago that said Germans were remarkable at engineering. Swedish at individual timepieces, those tiny clockwork types of things. So, and what would Italians happen to be famous for? Well, I said, I don't believe the study, but they said Italians were the world's greatest opportunists. And the guy used as a study, the mafia. He says, if you see an opportunity, you capitalize on it. That's what a smart person does. In any event, generations of people have blended their special talents, Germans, Swedes, Italians, we're all in it together now. And that's what I would get the children, I hope, to accept, is to stop focusing on differences and try to find a way to focus on what can we do together to make this place better. Children hear division on the TV and they don't want to think about it. They don't want to. They're really shut off.
So what's your greatest wish for your grandchildren?
Oh, wow! The greatest wish would be that they would be happy. I think everybody, but define happy is interesting, and so I would say rewarding in a way that their lives would be rewarding to themselves, that they would accept what life gave them. Well, it's the children, I think, accepting, once they accept life and what its gifts are, then you appreciate, like I do now at my age, after 70 some years. I did not appreciate things when I was 30 as I do now.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though I thought I was happy then, if I got a double in the local baseball game, I'm happier now seeing that the children have become such super people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the most important thing to me now, is watching the growth of the children. And for them now, I think they have happiness. For them is defined in short-term steps as they see what's important every day. It may be grades, it may be her ballet class, it may be a certain move. I know for Nick, it's catching a fly ball and getting a double play. He did that the other day, and everybody went nuts.
Yeah.
He caught a fly ball, touched second, and got a double play, and everybody went. So he thinks he's the greatest now. But in any event, it would be, I think the children appreciate the short-term goals and look for happiness.
So true.
Day-to-day things.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you, Ray. And with that, we'll end our conversation. And,
Okay.
Again, very much appreciate you contributing to this podcast this morning.
My pleasure. My pleasure.